Thanks. Thanks, Alison. Good evening, everybody. I'm sure I made John Gormley's life miserable. It wasn't all my fault, but I contributed to making his life miserable when he was in government. But I have enormous respect for him then and now, and so when he asked me to come along tonight, I was very happy to do so. My thanks also to the Lord Mayor for, as Malcolm says, the use of the hall. I think she said earlier it was built in 1715, so my journalist Matt's Dave tells me that's about 150 years ago or so very impressive. I'm happy to be here, but I'm slightly worried that not enough people have been giving out about the media. So let me encourage you. Let me encourage you to do that. Frankly, I find that slightly worrisome, as I always do when people don't give out about the media. But maybe we'll get around to that. Malcolm quoted, but when it comes to politics, let me stand up for the media. Malcolm quoted Winston Churchill, so let's give another old racist a run tonight and quote Enoch Powell. All the top racists are getting an outing tonight. Enoch Powell said that a politician complaining about the media is a bit like a ship's captain complaining about the sea, which I think there's something to learn from. And the media anticipating some of your criticisms to come. It's not, and I disagree with my dear friend Catherine. I'm not sure it's the media's job, and I speak as a practicing political journalist, obviously, and so that's my perspective on it, but I'm not sure it's our job to win the arguments for you, for the Green Party or for the Green Movement. It's our job to report accurately, fairly, comprehensively and critically on that argument as it takes place, for my purposes, within the political milieu. But just as it's not part of the opposition, in my view, the media is not an arm of government either. And there is an argument. There is a political argument. There isn't an argument about man-made carbon emissions heating up the planet to the extent that it means the future of all sorts of life on Earth is imperiled. There isn't an argument about that. We can maybe, there's some argument about timelines and that predictions are difficult, especially about the future. You don't have to do an awful lot of research to come across multiple instances over the last 50 years or so of us all being told there was 10 years left to save the planet. And I think if the Green Movement, the environmental movement more broadly, is honest with itself, it will say that it has been the boy who cried wolf on a number of occasions, and maybe that has lost it some public attention or some public argument. But the whole point about the boy who cried wolf is that the feckin' wolf turns up in the end. And I think that's a point that could more usefully be made. But there is an argument. So if there isn't an argument about that, there is an argument, a viable political argument that we see played out in front of us, and as Pippa would say, I'm sure behind closed doors a lot, about the pace and design of the measures that are necessary to counteract global warming and to cut the emissions that causes. And that argument is a viable one, and I don't think it's our job to win that argument. I think it's our job, as I say, to report on it. And that means that part of our job, even though practicing politicians I'm sure find it tiresome, it's our job to report on the political wrangling that takes place around climate action. And of course, as Catherine says, we tend to give more attention to where there's a row. It's more entertaining, it's more interesting, it's got more personalities in it, and our data tells us, that people are a lot more interested in that than they are in stuff about policy and that. But it's through the rows that you can often define yourself in policy terms. It's through the rows within government, the conduct and resolution of them, that gives you an opportunity to get your message across. I mean, inevitably there'll be compromises on policy issue, but rather than, were I to be in government, and this isn't a seminar giving advice to politicians the way they would make up their own minds, but were I to be in government, I wouldn't complain about journalists covering rows within government. I would use that fact to communicate my message. And you don't have to look very far to see examples of how that might be done. Last week, the Taoiseach sent out a couple of junior ministers to provoke a row over the budget. What did we do in Leinster House all week? We ran around after that story, and as Micheál Martin acknowledged at a doorstep, entertained everybody all week with stories of that. That's the way the media works, and I think you'd be an awful lot better off within Leinster House and the environs of Leinster House around government buildings, and realising that fact and trying to turn it to your use. And I think, just because you approach that row with good intentions doesn't guarantee you of anything. But I think if you make your case fairly before the public with conspicuous bona fides, and the Green Party is treated a little bit differently, I think, to many other parties in Irish politics by the public, then I think you stand a very good chance of making your case heard, of getting your message out there. And Pippa had quite a row in the Dáil chamber today with one of the rural Greens, and I often think, and the rural independents rather, and the rural independents, the regional independents, and non-aligned independents seem to reserve a special vitriol for the Greens within government, and maybe there's an extra edge to that vitriol when it's a woman Green. But I often wonder, is that maybe because they realise, rural independents realise, that the Green message, if it is communicated to lots of people in rural Ireland, will be very attractive to them and might threaten some of those rural independent votes. Let me say, I'm looking forward to questions and the discussion, but let me just say one or two other things. And this is in the way of self-criticism, I guess. While we may be reporting on rows within government and compromises within government and budget rows over climate action and so forth, I think when it comes to climate action we have a responsibility that we don't always live up to, and that's to put the correct context, global, environmental, national, of the bigger picture on those rows. And often that's where we get loud. We treat only of the row rather than of the context in which it takes place. And it's also part of our job to bring people face to face with the consequences of the policy changes that the government may make, or the changes that they may or may not choose to make in their own lives. The consequences of action, but also the consequences of inaction. And I think possibly that is it's a fair criticism of us that sometimes we may fall down on that. So look, I'll leave it there, and I look forward to your questions.